Welcome to another episode of PCN Life. I'm Julie Thompson.
And I'm Brian Sullivan.
Tonight we wanted to bring you some stories that will put the spring back into your step.
That's right, Julie. We have Leslie Cutler on set with another Mindful Moments to talk about reclaiming your voice.
And Brian brings us his local trail recommendations to get a jump on spring. And speaking of spring, what did you do first?
All right, so before we went out and hit the trails, we went to a green gardening expo. In fact, Kennedy's Country Gardens in Scituate recently hosted their 7th annual Gardening Green Expo, and they partnered with WaterSmart and the North and South Rivers Watershed Association for the event. Kids and adults alike got to have some fun, all while learning the importance of water conservation, going green,
and staying green.
You got it.
Let's watch.
Dating back to 2012, Kennedy's Country Gardens in Scituate has hosted their free Gardening Green Expo. They usually do it around the first official weekend of spring. Once again, Kennedy's teamed up with the North-South Rivers Watershed Association and the WaterSmart program for the Expo, and the theme for this year's event was Nature is the Answer. WaterSmart is a program that reaches 10 towns on the South Shore, which include Pembroke, Kingston, and Duxbury, and they provide education to school kids and adults on water conservation in your home, business, and town. Having the event on the first weekend of spring was all about timing.
In a couple of weeks, all of our greenhouses will be full of plants, flowers. There wouldn't be any room to have this sort of event. So we love doing this every year with them at about this time of year, and we're really looking forward to spring finally happening.
Those empty greenhouses were put to use, with one half of the house set up for several different speakers throughout the day. The middle room served as a space for the master gardeners of Massachusetts who were on hand to give gardening tips as well as do some soil testing. And on the other side of the house, vendors whose wares ran the gamut of everything from orders for rain barrels from the North-South Rivers Watershed Association, compost bins, mud play for the kids, worms and soil. There were even some goats outside from the Goatscaping Company. And of course, there were booths set up that discussed the importance of the pollinators that keep the cycle of life going.
Butterflies are pollinators, as well as bees and other insects, bats. They're really important for our food crops and other reasons. I raise monarch butterflies, which are sort of in peril right now. Their migrations are going down, so I can teach people how to raise monarch butterflies that will help with the migration.
The theme for the event was Nature is the Answer, and it was apparent in every corner.
We are looking at this in how being natural and being organic can be the healthiest for you, for your own body, for the environment, and for whatever it is that you're trying to grow. So the fewer chemicals we put in our bodies, the healthier we'll be. The fewer chemicals we put into our yards or into our gardens, the more healthy the environment will be.
When people leave here today, we're hoping that we give them a connection to nature, because you can't care about something if you're not involved and you don't love it. And we want to get people involved in nature and taking an active part in taking care of it.
I've even gotten in on this green gardening thing with my avocado pit that I've turned into a plant that's about this tall, and right now it's potted in organic soil. Hey, it's a start, right? Reporting from Scituate at the Gardening Green Expo, I'm Brian Sullivan, PACTV Community News.
We are so pleased to have back on set licensed psychotherapist Leslie Cutler for what we call Mindful Moments.
Thank you, Julie. It's wonderful to be here.
Welcome back.
Thank you.
For the numerous time.
Yes.
We're going to talk today about reclaiming your voice, which is a very interesting and very topical conversation. So what brought you to this subject matter today?
You know, this is something that's been on my mind a bit lately, especially with the Me Too movement. We're seeing so many people come forward with their truth, a truth that they've held deep inside for so long. Mm-hmm. So I really became interested in this, wondering, you know, why is it that people kind of stuff their voice? Why is it that people do not come forward sooner? So I wanted to look at that a little bit today, as well as offering 5 different ways to kind of find your voice, to reclaim your truth, to find your voice once again.
Can I ask you, is finding your truth, does it necessarily have to do with something that has happened to you or an event that's happened? Or is it also kind of a philosophy of how you just deal with life and what happens in life?
I think it could apply to either one. I mean, truth is either objective or subjective. And I think, Julie, if there was some sort of horrible car accident, God forbid, out front, and you and I both witnessed it, and the police came to us and asked for our story, we would each have a different story to tell. Even though both of our stories would be correct, I might notice the red car, you might notice the blue car, and this and that. And so we both would bring it based upon our experiences and the lens by which we see the world.
Exactly.
But you know, what I think happens so often is sometime in our early childhood, we are taught to silence our voice. You know, my dad used to say, children are to be seen and not heard. And you know, and I think with our generation, our parents were raised that way as well.
Sure.
So very early on, the message gets sent to us that, listen, hey, quiet down on the questions, you know, tone it down a little bit. I heard that a lot. Tone it down, you know, take it back a few notches. And you know, and it was stifling. So after a while, you learn to withhold. You stuff down those things. You go through life very tight-lipped. And this withholding gets passed from generation to generation. And even in the case where you have parents that are very kind, caring, and open, they themselves still withhold. And we as children were mimickers. We watched our parents, and that became our normal. So without even realizing it, we wind up doing that ourselves. And when our truth gets withheld for that long, we start to question it.
So there's ways to help offset this.
Right, so exactly. So today I wanted to talk about 5 different ways that we can really start living and telling our truth, because this is truly the only way to live a happy life.
Okay, so the first one is notice in what circumstances you tend to withhold your truth.
Right, and this is step 1. And it's like anything that you want to work on. It's like there's a certain mindfulness that needs to come to the surface. You know, perhaps there are certain people in your life that you say, it's interesting, every time I'm with that person, I tend to sugarcoat the truth, dance around the block a little bit before going directly to what it is that I need to say. And what is it about this relationship that's triggering me? Do they remind you of somebody in the past who's controlled you, or maybe that teacher that was, you know, horrible to you in the 4th grade? But it's important to make that connection and to realize, okay, this is going to be the person where I'm going to be challenged.
So you consciously need to identify that.
So
to yourself.
First is to identify that, as in all things. And so again, awareness is everything. Number 2 is really giving yourself permission to take your time, build your courage to get clear. And you know, I tell my clients this all the time. It's important to first note it, like, oh dear, in that meeting I should have said this, but I didn't. But it doesn't mean that it can't be revisited later. Sometimes you need to step back and sit with it for a little while, remove the emotional component and say, okay, how does this settle with me? What is it that I need to say in this moment? So, you know, take the time you need to step away if necessary.
And do you also kind of try to learn how to present whatever it is you're going to present, in what form you present it?
Yes, and we will get to that moving forward.
Okay, excellent. Trust that the truth shall set you free.
Well, this is kind of a universal
Bumper
tenet.
sticker,
Yeah, you know, I think Paul said it in the New Testament, and you know, there's various yogis that have said it throughout time, and it is so true. I, you know, truly believe that the truth also always comes to the surface. And you know, it might take decades for that to happen, but that does happen. And I always say, you know, truth cuts through illusion. It's that sword that kind of divides all of the muck and brings us to that level of clarity. You know, it's frequently the road less traveled, but it is the thing that supplies the answers to all.
Right. Now, on the truth shall set you free, I notice I have a lot of friends who've had relationships that have broken up, or divorces, or just things that haven't worked out. And for a long time, you end up viewing everything from your perspective. And it seems that as time and as things go on, you end up saying, well, there's always 2 sides to every story.
Right.
And maybe I could have done something a little different.
Yes, and I see that especially in the case of infidelity in relationships, where the person feels so victimized that it's very, very difficult for them to kind of step back from that level of betrayal and say, wait a second, there are things in here for me to learn as well.
Exactly.
Yeah, and sometimes that might take a little bit of time for, you know, kind of removing that emotional component and then having that clarity.
But then you really do have the clarity of the absolute truth.
Yes.
Where you can see it from both sides.
And then it requires a certain level of ownership, taking it to
Absolutely.
the next step so that
Absolutely.
those patterns are therefore not repeated
Exactly.
and carried forward.
Exactly.
Number 4 is having no attachment to how the truth is received. And this is tough.
Now, what does that mean? Paraphrase that.
Well, in other words, listen, it might not go over very well. And you know, sometimes the truth is kind of dirty and
Yeah,
people don't want to
messy.
deal with it. It's
Yep.
messy, you know, and it might not be, you know, I think about some of these people that have spoken lately about, you know, sexual abuse histories. And for them, the most important part in their healing has been saying and speaking their truth and letting their truth be known.
Sure.
Not necessarily what the final outcome is of what the ultimate punishment is for the person that victimized them.
Yep.
And that's where the courage needs to take place. So before going in to speak, you know, kind of find your center, taking those deep breaths, get grounded, and release the whole idea of any attachment to what the final outcome will be.
Right. Should you practice if you're going to be doing something that's really going to be difficult for you to get it out there? Do you practice in your head or in your heart, and then if this happens, then I'll react this way. If they react this way, then I'll react this way. Or do you just let it happen as it happens?
I don't know. I'm such a proponent of being authentic and real.
Yeah.
You know, maybe the one thing that can be practiced is, what am I not going to say because it will not help the situation? You know, is let me review those things that just aren't necessary.
Yeah, I can leave these facts out.
I can leave these facts
It's not
out.
going to help.
Yes.
Okay. And the 5th is wrap your truth in love. Ha.
So prior to working as a psychotherapist, I spent about 12 or 13 years working in design.
Yep.
And anytime a new product came to market, it would start in the engineering department, where the ideas and the content, so to speak, would be built and developed. It would then go to us, marketing, packaging, development. We were the ones that made it pretty. You know, you wouldn't buy a bottle of perfume in an old mason jar, nor would you buy a bag of cereal in a garbage bag. Right. So,
Why not?
Right. You know, people do look at a book by its cover and
Sure.
make judgments and that sort of thing. So the content of what we speak to people is what happens in the engineering department. What happens in the creative development is the delivery, and the delivery should always be wrapped in love. And when I talk to clients about this, it was like what we were saying. It's like, what is not necessary to say?
Right.
How can we deliver this to the person we love and care about, where we're being true to ourselves, but yet honoring who it is that they are?
Right.
And that is the absolute ultimate challenge.
Sure. And what if the truth that you're telling is going to have a negative or deleterious effect on the person you're saying it to, but it needs to be said?
And that's the challenge too. In order to have any type of authentic relationship with anybody, sometimes you need to deliver, somewhat critical information. But again, it's about how it's said,
Right.
how it's wrapped,
Right.
and therefore it will hopefully be received in a way that's much more promising.
And it might take a while for that person who's receiving it to really understand.
To truly understand.
And sometimes that's okay. Sometimes people need time.
Yeah, but as long as we're withholding truth, then we're not being honest, and it doesn't allow us to have those deep level relationships
Right.
that we truly crave and desire. It is a challenge, but there is this child in us that was silenced for so long and
Right.
looking to be free.
Yep. Excellent topic. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
What wonderful points.
Thank you so
Yes,
much.
we'll have you again for more wisdom
Thank
and
you.
mindful moments.
Thank you, Julie.
Thank you, Leslie. Spring has sprung, and to embrace the season, we hit the trails with Brian Sullivan. Take it away, Brian.
Oftentimes in New England, winter can feel like it's overstayed its welcome. A snow squall in early spring can make something as simple as taking the dog for a walk feel like a battle against nature. While the winter of 2018 wasn't necessarily hostile from start to finish, it did feature a couple of storms that left some devastation in their wake, especially on many of the hiking trails in our towns here on the South Shore. The good news is, as the weather gets warmer, and it will get warmer, the ground that looked like this is starting to look more like this. So in the spirit of spring awakening, let's take a look at some trails that we can use to shake off the winter blues and get outdoors to welcome our warmer seasons here in the Bay State. We'll start here on the edge of town in Pembroke.
What I like about this area is that there's so much going on. Where I'm standing right here on this overpass is the town line of Pembroke and Hanover. And this is where the Indian Head River Reservoir eventually turns into the North River, which twists and turns through several different towns before making its way out to Mass Bay on the boundary line of Scituate and Marshfield. Just behind me, you've got the Tucker Preserve, which, if you do the entire 4-mile loop trail, will take you through 3 different towns. So the whole area is really serene and pretty incredible at the same time.
Starting at the kiosk on the Pembroke side, hikers will have the Indian Head River on their left. This is the entrance to the Tucker Preserve. The 3 towns covered in the 4-mile loop are Pembroke, Hanson, and Hanover, with Tucker making up nearly a quarter of that trek. Hikers can enjoy the wide trails with a clear view of Indian Head River most of the way. And while the destruction from winter 2018 was no stranger to this spot, the tireless efforts from the folks at Wildlands Trust have allowed them to remain easily passable.
Our properties get cleaned up mainly myself with the chainsaw, and with the 4 nor'easters we've had this month, I've relied very heavily on a lot of our local volunteers. Almost on a daily basis, I have a volunteer to help me for a couple hours, and without those volunteers, it would be a very slow process.
Overall, Tucker Preserve is 78 acres of land that were donated to Wildlands Trust by Sidney and Harold Tucker in 1993. And while the Wildlands Trust signs are a great way to keep travelers following the path, don't forget, there are a couple of rules to follow when you're out in these woods.
The Tucker Preserve, particularly the two main rules that we try to enforce are no off-road vehicles. And that's on all of our properties. We don't allow ATVs or dirt bikes, and the other one is we don't allow hunting at this preserve either. We do allow fishing, though, in accordance with state laws.
Whether it's fishing or just enjoying the somewhat rugged terrain and tall trees for a day hike, it's not uncommon to feel completely removed from the Pembroke neighborhood where the trailhead is located.
There are particular areas on that trail that you might think you're in New Hampshire. It is spectacular above the river, high bluffs above the river, hemlock groves out there. It's just a beautiful, beautiful area to hike.
The experience I want people to have is both a safe experience. That's why we've been doing the tree work, trying to make the trails passable, and also a way to just sort of decompress and get away from things and just be out in nature and enjoy the natural areas around us.
I could have probably stayed a few more hours just watching this water flow from the dam under the bridge, but we had to move on to our next spot in Kingston, where if you look hard enough, you could find this next trail hiding in plain sight. Of all of the entrance points to the trails on the Cranberry Watershed Preserve, this parking area off of Lake Street is the most limited. Hikers will notice on the way in that this is also a portion of the Bay Circuit Trail. But what should really stand out is this immense bridge that was put in here and unveiled for the public in October of 2017.
It was about $15,000 or $20,000, and this is a new access to this Cranberry Watershed in that it crosses the Jones River, which you can hear below us maybe, which is flowing quite heavy right now. And we needed a way to be able to cross it at all times of year, not just when this river was fairly dry. And so we were able to get this aluminum bridge that was made way up in Bar Harbor, Maine, and delivered down here. It's about a 25-foot span over the river, and then it extends to a 300-foot boardwalk, which is elevated off the ground to take us through some kind of wet areas.
Evidence of destruction from winter 2018 was apparent on this section as well, making for difficult hiking in some spots. But with over 3.5 miles of trails to choose from and several other entry points, all hope was not lost. While there is also parking on Grove Street, the most popular area to hit the trails from is here at the lower parking lot behind the Silver Lake Middle School. Entering here from the left or on the trail up by the water tower. Hikers and bikers can enjoy views of the Howard Brook Reservoir. There's also an entrance over by the sports fields. It's just up around the corner from this spot that travelers can get out from under the tree line and look at some of the old bogs. You may notice the letters X and C on these posts, and that's because much of this area is training ground for the Silver Lake Cross Country team. And since the team uses them so often, they help out with the upkeep. But with nearly 4 miles of trails, there's always need for more volunteers.
We do look to get people to be assigned as land stewards. So if you live near a property, we really encourage you to reach out to the conservation agent, which is a full-time role in Kingston, and to offer to be a land steward, which consists of just notifying someone, either help pick up things or clear them off the trail, but we're not expecting you to have a chainsaw if a tree falls. Just notify the team and we can come out and we can clear it up and make it easy and enjoyable for people to walk.
Unfortunately, we couldn't spend the whole day at the peaceful confines of the Cranberry Watershed Preserve and Bay Circuit Trail. We were off to Duxbury, home of the 823 acres of North Hill Marsh.
The trails here at North Hill Marsh are probably the most extensive of any of the trails in Duxbury. They link to several other conservation areas. The habitat is mostly white pine, upland white pine. There's some change in elevation. That Watch Hill is in here, which is really interesting, but also you can go around some ponds. There's some streams, so it's a nice variety. One thing that's unique about North Hill Marsh is that it's owned partially by the town of Duxbury through the Conservation Department, but also part of it is Mass Audubon. And so we have manage the pond itself and the upland right around the pond, and then the town of Duxbury has sort of all the wooded upland that you see and the adjacent cranberry bogs.
Just like the other towns that we visited, the trails here were also not immune to the effects of the winter of 2018. Walking through the woods and seeing the devastation up close can be a real eye-opener as to the strength of the storms that pass through our way. When we visited this conservation area in the summer of 2016, we noticed the color-coded markings on the trees to let us know what trails we were on. That knowledge came in handy this time around as well, with so many trees down. We also kept our eyes open for ticks in 2016. Well, that didn't change this time around either, because they don't seem to care what season it is. So a word to the wise is to always do a thorough check once you get out of the woods and use permethrin as a repellent. North Hill Marsh draws the biggest crowds as far as trail hikers and bikers are concerned. So if you're looking for a spot that receives a little less attention and with only 60 acres covers a lot less ground, look no further than about a mile up the road to the Crowell Conservation Area. From 1910 to 2010, these were cranberry bogs. Now funded by the Duxbury Community Preservation Act, it's a great place to walk. What it lacks in overall acreage, it makes up for with serene simplicity. The birds in the area seem to be in a competition with the industrial world on its perimeters for noise supremacy, and from the sound of it, I think the birds are winning. This steel barn looks like something out of a Come Visit Old New England brochure, and I love it. While you can hear the birds, you're more likely to see the ducks. They're not as camera shy. Ideally, this spot is a great getaway for a lunch break by yourself or with your dog. Me, I could have put up a tent and stayed overnight, but I had miles to go before I could sleep. Miles Standish State Forest, that is. This place definitely puts the miles in Miles Standish, 45 of them to be exact, covering parts of Plymouth and Carver. Entering the State Forest from Long Pond Road in Plymouth, you can cover a few of those miles yourself, just driving in to get to some of the trails. But the removal of yourself from the outside world is part of the charm of this place. We dropped by in February of 2018 to get a look at one of the boardwalks that was due for repairs. In the process, we took a hike along the East Head Reservoir Trail. This 2.5-mile loop trail offers nothing but views, even on a misty day like this one. This state forest has been a treasure here in Massachusetts since 1916 and will continue to be so for years to come. So we thought we'd get a look at one of the new kids in town. Drivers on Beaver Dam Road have likely passed these signs for the Tidmarsh Wildlife Sanctuary and Mass Audubon. The story of the transition of this property has been well documented by PCN and PCN Life. Here we are in December of 2015, March 2016, June 2016, October 2016, May 2017, and finally in October of 2017 when the sale of nearly half the property to Mass Audubon was finalized. In all of that time, however, we never actually took a look at the trails for ourselves. The dirt parking lot on Beaver Dam Road is pretty easy to spot, and there's usually plenty of space. As a human, this sign here doesn't bother me so much, but if I was a dog, I'd probably sound like this. The kiosk at the start of the trail shows you a map, a list of do's and don'ts, and some other interesting background information on what this place is all about. Overall, the sanctuary covers 479 acres and features 3 miles of loop trails. Taking a right at this fork in the road, we headed past this pond with the hopes of seeing this dude, which I did, but I have no proof, so I'll show you this duck instead. In general, the trails are very wide, dating back to when this area was cranberry bogs and needed to have width for vehicles to move in and out. Of course, you will pass some side trails that are more on the narrow side, but staying on this main entrance trail gives hikers plenty of room to move. Just up ahead, you'll find the Meadow Trail and the Ridge Trail. And if breathtaking views of the valley and rivers down below aren't your thing, then turn around now. Actually, this part of the trail is closed from this point on, so if you were planning on going further, you have to turn around. But fear not, there's always the Meadow Trail. Down here, you can take in the sights and sounds of Beaver Dam Brook, which runs from this spot here all the way out to White Horse Beach and eventually Cape Cod Bay. As with any trails in the woods, be sure to protect yourself against ticks, and since so much of it is out in the open, be sure to protect yourself against the sun as well, preferably with something organic that wasn't tested on animals. And don't forget, if you live in Plymouth, this is in your backyard, and it's free, so soak it in when you can. Before I leave, I want to get one last look at this view. Of course, if you're looking for something with higher altitudes to it, I do have some vacation time coming up, so maybe I can take this camera up into the White Mountains with me. In the meantime, hopefully these trails we've showcased have given folks some ideas of places that you can go to get lost in nature without actually getting lost. Wrapping things up here in South Plymouth, I'm Brian Sullivan for PCN Life.
Brian, that was just an amazing expose of the 6 beautiful trails that are so close to us. And we spend so much time in our cars, in our houses, at work. They're so local, they're so close, and you just did a beautiful job showing them to us and the peacefulness and the beauty of them.
I'm glad you enjoyed it. It was a lot of fun. And you know what you can do? Shut off your phone, leave it in the car, and then you go out on these trails and have a good time. It's beautiful, and I did it all in one day.
No, you didn't.
No, but it's a lot of fun, and yeah, I can't tell people enough that these trails are right there.
Yeah.
They're available. You go as far as you want.
Yep.
All right, you only want to do 15 minutes? Do 15 minutes. You want
Right.
to spend an hour? Then have at it.
And you walked through all those trails. It's amazing how much walking you did.
Me and my crew, right?
Yes, and your camera. Thank you, Brian.
You bet.
Well, that's a wrap. Thanks so much for watching PCN Life. You can rewatch this episode or any episode on our PCN YouTube channel. Be sure to follow us on Instagram at PCN Life for behind-the-scenes pics and infos. We will see you again soon.